very good evening to you. Thank you for joining us on another edition of The Conversation. My name is Kola Akintoba. Tonight we have another special guest. He is a Nigerian politician and foremost economist. He was a presidential candidate in the 2003 general elections on the platform of the new Nigerian People's Party, NNP, a former World Bank economic strategist and former two-time Minister of Finance and also Minister of National Planning. He was also former Minister of Transport. It's my pleasure to welcome on today's edition of The Conversation, Dr. Kalu, Idika Kalu. You're welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule to talk to us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let me start from what I call your primary constituency, and that's the economy. As a foremost economist and former finance minister, I'd like you to look at the Nigerian economy for us and tell us what your views are in terms of the present situation of things in Nigeria.
Yeah, well, that certainly is the most topical issue that you can imagine. We are a very big country. Indeed, we are projected to be number 3. Soon, if we can manage the health factor, and of course with the health factor is the economic factor to sustain over 400 million people by 2050, we should be number 3.
Right.
Behind only India and China. That certainly boggles the mind. And that was not tough enough. There's a projection, and you don't have to put too much weight on the projection. It depends on who's looking at what. But generally, we're supposed to be around the 9th in terms of size of gross domestic product by 2050, say. For the last 50 years, should we say, I think Nigeria has always been thought of as a potential major powerhouse economically.
The giant of Africa.
Yes, we have it all. It's a pity if we ever have to say that in the past tense, and that was like a historical reference, but we still have it all. Size of population, and that is important, where an investor usually looks at the potential size of the market. Of course, that ideally is based not so much on numbers as on per capita income in evaluating the potential purchasing power that's involved. But given the size of this economy, we didn't have to be worrying so much about what to constitute what we call economies of scale. If we wanted to build industries, if we had the funds, we could mobilize the funds. You build the largest plant that will give you the lowest cost per unit. And it will be cheapest, it will be more economical to do so. So we didn't have any of those constraints in terms of economic size, and which also means the size of the local market, just abstracting from the regional market or international trade, which we have been involved in for quite a long time. So here we have the population, we have the economic size. And then, even more importantly, you could say we had it all in terms of the material resources. I know these days it's been said that it's not really a matter of resources. It's really a question of, in those days, economists talked about embodied capital, or you can say embodied technology. If you have capital that just carries sand in a bag and hauls to the site, that's not really the kind of capital. We're talking about labor that has a lot of training and skill, and all that connotes certain levels of productivity. So Nigeria had it all. We had a low-level extensive agriculture, cocoa, palm oil, palm kernels, cotton, groundnuts, name it. You can come up with a basket of 50 or more very important strategic materials. On top of that, we had minerals. Columbite, tin, iron ore, gold. You can list a whole lot of stuff. I did some work on that when I was a consultant after coming back from the World Bank. We did some industrial profile of Nigeria. I think it was published somewhere, helping to look at all these potentials for industrialization in Nigeria. So it is therefore correct for people who look back and say, we've really never lived up to that potential. And instead of sustaining higher growth, deepening of the industrial sector, improving productivity in agriculture, which means you are getting higher productivity per hectare. And therefore, you're able to release land in large numbers to the non-agricultural sector to keep your wages competitive, so that you can become very competitive in all your simple manufacturers or more intricate manufacturers, which is where we should be at on the eve of all this artificial intelligence and high technology and so on. We had it all. But I must say that what we really have a job to look at, regardless of our political preference, regardless of our political party, regardless of our regional sources, to ask ourselves the big question: why did we not do better than we have done? It's a real question. And the sooner we tackle that question, the better. We've had elections with all the problems we had. We should all own up that Nigeria has not performed the way it should. But having said that, you know, I have friends all over, as you can tell. I mean, I worked on East Asia. I didn't work in the Africa region. I have Chinese, Japanese, Koreans. I worked mostly on Korea. In the 70s, late 70s, I left the World Bank at the turn of the 70s. Actually, I left about the end of September 80. That's when I left to come back to Nigeria. So I've been back here for quite some time. And the question is always, if we are able to get audience among East Asians on how you reform, it's not so much the nomenclature, whether it's called SAP or whatever it is, which we got hung up on, unfortunately. Those are the indications of why we failed, because we were hanging on terms instead of looking at the problems we needed to evolve policies to address. How do we improve agriculture? We should be a major agricultural production, agricultural exports, packaging, refining, name it. And of course, a lot of the non-agricultural resources we have will be complemented by the agricultural resources to create a very diverse industrial complex that we should have had. We've not quite succeeded. We didn't get our paper mills on. We developed plantations, and anybody's guess what's happened to the plantations. Well, we should be self-sufficient in paper. We started aluminum, we started steel.
Right.
Brazil started steel about the same time we did. They are producing helicopters and planes. Our Jakarta, our rolling mills, Jos, where were they? Jos, Jakarta, Jos, and all the, I think we had 2 or 3 other rolling mills all over the place. Where are they? You understand? So these are some of the factors that, regardless of party, regardless of religion, of region, these are the issues that Nigerians should be facing. And the sooner we face these issues, the better.
So my question to you, sir, is why is it difficult to harness all these resources, human and material resources, for the greater good of this nation?
Well, there we go into another issue. We can talk about leadership in the broadest sense, but I think some of us have been worrying. We have to disaggregate that to, have we been able to sustain the manpower development, the quality of our schools, the spread of our schools, kindergarten? You may say that is trivial, but these days you have to start it right. Fundamentals, as you move into a more scientific age, you find ways to introduce this so people are able to adapt better. So the question is, why do we all seem to agree that the educational system seems to have fallen? We were pretty sure we were up there. I mean, when we went to the United States, went on this African American scholarship program. That was a write-up in Time magazine. How a lot of us were topping their classes in the top schools in America, for instance. People have done very well in the UK and in Europe, but these days that's still there, but not quite with the same kind of preponderance. So you can extrapolate from that to ask the question whether we're able to sustain the manpower aspect of development. It's not the resources that will grow themselves. It is the leadership. It is the education that yields the leadership. It's the research. All the research from more plantation in Ibadan to all the research institutions for palm oil and other things. How are we able to sustain them? Did we so destroy the relative remuneration and capital allocation to these things that they now decline? So we are not able to sustain those things that will give us the kind of broad growth, deep growth, and sustainable high growth to absorb the high increase in the population and the labor force. Those are the issues we have to totally disaggregate if we are going to get to policy amenable solutions that we need. So it's not enough to ask the question in a broad sweep. We have to go back to discuss the manpower that yields the leadership, both in the political sense, in the sense of people who are managing our corporations, who are managing our private sector, and who are setting up as individual non-corporate entities. All of that is required to sustain this sort of deep, high, sustainable growth, which Nigeria should have had at least, shall we say, at least 25 years. By now, at least by the turn of the century, we should really have been on our own. But look at us, we have to go back to how, after the high growth of cocoa, we built cocoa house, we built all kinds of institutions in the west, in the east, and in the north. These days, it's not clear what we've done with the resources we had. And on top of that, we didn't even get there, the introduction of oil and gas. I was just finishing up in high school when we were getting into the oil and gas, and some of our teachers were so excited. They would tell us, oh, you guys are facing such a bright future with the multifaceted nature of the byproducts from oil and gas. This is in addition to what we already have. So this whole question of the Dutch syndrome and so on, where you get oil and you abandon them, we should have known better. The idea of having this abundance, this natural blessing we had, was to make sure we deepened those sectors we started with, plowed all these savings from the oil and non-gas into agriculture, reduce the requirement for much higher production in agriculture, make those ones more amenable to manufacturing and other tertiary industries, like we have the film industry and all these things, but producing better quality products, qualities that will stand the competition from Latin America and East Asia. We were almost losing it in cocoa and even in palm oil, because we didn't sort of feed back to research to sustain it. We will export things and they say half of it was damaged or disease and so on, when in fact we should be having the highest quality products in all of these areas after all these decades of being major suppliers in the whole world.
I'd like you to look at the economic policies of this current administration from a professional point of view. And do you honestly think that we have competent hands managing our economy?
Well, these are my friends, Well, let me tell you, I think, as I said, the true patriot is one who really can abstract from the petty subdivisions of politics or region and so on, and we have enough of them in this country. This is a very central issue, which should not be a function of which political party, who your friends are, any of these things. I have made lots of comments on this. First, I was livid. I was in the US at the time we started with this currency thing. And the idea that currency change should be used for anything other than the natural reordering and improvement of our fiduciary environment, where you are retiring old notes, you are creating more units, you are rationalizing multiplicity of units, and so on and so forth. And introducing new currency for, producing the paper we used for it, not what we always have to import from somewhere, and so on and so forth. So that was unbelievable how we messed that up thoroughly. And to hear that they were being used for some political purpose is unthinkable from my standpoint, professional standpoint. I thought that was ridiculous. Now, let's go to some of these issues. I've made some comments on the removal of subsidies. As an economist, there is no question that what we all strive for is efficiency. Efficiency means you are trying to get the most out of every naira, which means you must always allow the investor, the saver,
right,
the policy maker to be looking in terms of the most allocative efficiency at any given point in time. So it's in the interest of everybody that resources are not misused. Having said that, it's also clear historically that subsidies go back to before the 50s or even earlier in some other form. It may not have been called subsidies. These are ways of assisting growth. You don't start growing by being so efficient. But once you know you are going to grow, and you are going to grow in competitive terms, which means the more you produce, the cheaper the cost, both for the producer and for the consumer. So to transit that learning curve, you introduce some support. That's how subsidies started. But once you allow subsidies to get to the point where they effectively interfere with the natural relationships between costs and supply, price, and your ability to supply the product, not only in absolute terms, but also within a time frame, then you have to be very careful. It's not something you just use anyhow. It has to serve a purpose, to rationalize the system, to create more efficiency, to create employment, higher production, and so on and so forth. So yes, but once you allow that to sustain for so long, and I'm talking about 2 or 3 years, let alone 2 decades, you see, there is a lag, and that's how I try to intervene in the analysis. There's a lag in everything. The system cannot adjust so automatically, no matter how self-righteously you want to change the environment. You have to take account of the lags in even consumption. For you to even consume what you have already produced, it takes time. Not to talk of where you are now producing, not to talk of where you are not just producing locally, but you are supplying through imports. So you have to take all that into consideration. And that was where I thought we could have done a little bit better. Some people will say, oh, we should have planned it, but yeah, that is really saying the same thing. You can come up with a brand policy, but you also have to be aware of the circumstances, the ramifications in terms of saving, production, consumption, imports. I don't want to go into too many technical issues. You say, reading my book on all those equations or so. Now, so everything has to be in tandem so that the ordinary person, the buyers and sellers in Igbo, they know these things. They live these facts of changing costs, changing prices. So you want to sustain those changes at the level they are used to. Not what somebody will wake up on Monday morning and he sees a steep rise in cost, a steep rise in price.
And that's what's happening now.
And he cannot do anything about it.
Right.
You have to anticipate that. That is even for the local person. If you change policy that requires 6 months, because that's how long it will take to even get supply from outside the country. Those are all the things, and it is the sense of it that will enable you to come out with the right complex of policies that will make it seem, like just normal day-to-day changes, seamless things that the production functions, the consumption functions can absorb without undue
not rocking the table.
To rocking the table to the point where the table falls over. Then you know something is wrong. So the question is not whether removing the subsidy is right or wrong. In 2014, I had to go through the same explanation because my colleague who was then minister said, but can you wrote this thing about this privatization or rationalization through tariff removal? I say yes, but the timing, is not the implementation in this country. That's another thing. We jump too fast. We always assume our ideas are so perfect. Our policies are so well put together. But you can't have policies to be well put together without presuming those under fundamentals that underscore these policies. Those are part of the policy making. So for us to go around always saying our policies are perfect, it's just implementation, that's some lazy way of analyzing situation. It's much more serious than that. We don't take enough of the underlying consequences in the formulation of our policies. We go very emotional. Yes, we have the political will to just take a decision. But while you are exhibiting that political will in a general sense, you better have your boiler room guys go back to the underlying policies, because that's the only way policies make sense, is that they can be implemented. If they can be implemented, you can't say the policies are perfect and it's just inadequate implementation. Of course, in our own case, invariably, the policy environment is shoddy, and then poor implementation just makes it that much more disenabled to sort of approach the problems we're trying to solve. So this is, we have to be more humble to look at it in sequence. First, the policies have to be right. All the underlying things that impinge on the policies have to be taken into account to the extent that is possible. And then implementation, both the institutional implementation, the manpower deployment to implement, the phasing of the implementation, that is another whole set of things that also have to be taken into account. Not the ordinary citizen is a receiver. He's not the one to start tightening belts and waiting time and so on. It's the policy makers, whether in public or private, in corporate or non-corporate. It's the person who brings up the policy that has to take that precious time to think through.
Well, you've talked about the removal of subsidy. There are other policies, several other policies. For instance, the floating of the naira.
Well, you see, deregulation.
Right.
Deregulation is a general term. I was reading something maybe a few hours before you guys got here. This talk about floating the naira. The naira is floating all the time. You go to Ebutero, Oyibo, or wherever, the naira is floating all the time. Do you get the point I'm making? Things are being imported, they are subject to different trade policies and so on, they are affecting their prices and so on and so forth. So those things are the ones that are floating, letting the currency float in terms of the value, the current value. When you start talking about floating it in a formal sense, whether you're talking about in other words, I'm referring to the appreciation and depreciation of the purchasing power parity is a continuous thing. So where you bother to talk about float is where the central monetary authorities consider it necessary to look at the value, the purchasing power value. But in fact, the thing is happening all the time. Appreciation is going on, depreciation is happening, but you have to take explicit record of what is happening when you decide formally to devalue or to revalue. Of course, we are more used to devaluing, but in some countries, China was being beaten over the head for not revaluing too quickly. So it was said they were having undue advantage with the other competing India, America, Brazil, all the other major trading partners. But the question for them will be whether they are gaining that much by pricing cheaply than they are losing by not selling more. You know, they are gaining more by selling more than by moving up the efficiency chain to reflect higher price for different level of products.
Right.
So we didn't have to be talking about floating the naira. We just should have just deregulated the market. You see what I'm saying? You can't be running after maintaining a particular value. Those things should be changing so almost imperceptibly that you let it go, and then you address the issue of relative scarcity and relative abundance, introducing new products, introducing higher quality products. That is what helps you to sustain the floating naira. The floating naira should not be sustained by arbitrary stopping and setting a price, or stopping it and bringing additional currency to back it at a particular level. Is to address the underlying supply factors of production, factors of distribution.
So what role will local production play in stemming some of this, in stabilizing some of these issues you've raised?
Well, that's
because we import more than we produce.
No, but that doesn't have to be the case, and it was not always the case. Both import substitution and export promotion are really the same. They are in the same line. It is a question of the conversion rate of your domestic price and the external price. In other words, where the emphasis should be is this country can produce so many things for itself. As I said elsewhere, it is most erroneous, and I can say very unkind to our maker, to say we are a mono economy. For goodness sake, we are the most diversified in terms of endowment. So the whole matrix, the whole industrial matrix should have been changing. Even if our tastes are changing faster, at least we're able to produce those we are using to pay for those extra tastes we are now feeling we don't produce, we have to export. But the answer to your question is, our import substitution should be so high. Why are we importing so much? And if we are importing so much, we have enough resources to export more to pay for them. And that balances your...
That's right.
You understand? To say that we don't produce anything, it's ridiculous. There's nothing we cannot produce. If you look at our trade directory, whether you go back to 1950 or 2000, you will find everything you see imports are there. Of course, some of the exports are re-exports from importation from other areas. We re-export from here with or without any extra value added. So the answer to that is the whole policy of industrial production, industrial incentives, resource allocation, a proper monetary system, a proper financial system, a proper credit system, you know, where you are looking at the needs of farmers, land, seeds, fertilizer, weeds, transportation, communications, the market system, their credit system that's available. We had all this NACB and NIDB and others. We've had all these issues, but you see, we were jumping around without making sure, and that's where the manpower thing comes in again. These should all be major institutions, so we should have no problem responding to growing demand from domestic production. We didn't have to have all this go to the import, never, and all that silly stuff. Well, sorry for those who consume this. What I'm saying in effect is, some nouveau rich acquire all these funny tastes, but this is a fringe in relation to the vast majority of Nigerians. We should have been producing so much. And as I said, it's all one end of the whole matrix. Depending on your conversion price, all those things you are import substituting, you should now get to the point where you are exporting them. Name it. What is what we could not export? I just gave the example of from our steel and aluminum. We should be exporting vehicles now. We're talking about Innocent. Unfortunately, I've not really had enough time to know how much is really domesticated there. But at least there's a fair level of import substitution. Yeah. And if we can do that at that level of technology, how much more? Grains and vegetables and oils and foods. As I said, we have abundance of tasty soups from Nigeria. The dollars you earn from those are precisely the same dollars you earn from oil and gas.
Right.
And of course, because they are all over, that already means you are conferring income growth over a much larger range than just those people in the Niger Delta or in any of the oil producing areas or mineral producing areas. That's their own oil and gas. We should have been very big in this area. So we cannot blame anybody but ourselves that we just didn't move in there. So that's where we have to go. Are we teaching enough in our universities so people can see these things? Are we encouraging them? Are we supplying them with the wherewithal to look at all this vast mesh of profitable enterprises in non-agriculture, within agriculture, you know? So, you know, the Americans always saw Nigeria as another mini America in those days, but we have not lived up to that. They started the AGOA where they were encouraging us to produce and export to America. We were among the least responsive because we were not structured to do it. We were not structured to do it. Other countries available textiles, foods, this and that. We found it very difficult. We should have been pushing for those things. And let me say in parentheses, one of the indicators of our failure is the fact that when we started moving more into India and China, these are very large markets that we should have been riding on as a pool for our own industrial development. But what did we do? Because we were not structurally prepared, we didn't develop our infrastructure, we didn't develop our oil and gas, we were complaining that they were now the ones flooding our own markets. We should have been flooding their own markets. We should have been flooding, and when we do, they won't say we are flooding because it will just be a small proportion of their own imports, a small proportion of their own consumption from their own imports and their own local production. But it will be large for us because we are relatively a small economy. Those should have been new areas of economic activity.
I have a few interesting questions for you. First of all, I'd like you to look at the cost of living for us, which is spiraling beyond reach, beyond control, and also the dollar that continues to skyrocket. What needs to be done to ensure that these two issues are brought under control quickly?
Well, don't say quickly. There are no such things as quick fixes for these things. We've just gone to the point that we've started derailing. Let's be generous. Let's say from the 60s. As soon as we introduced oil and gas, we got caught up with that consumption. You know, you go to the airports and see everybody's going to London on vacation, and you wonder. And a lot of that had to do with disparate exchange rates that made it look so cheap. The whole point of the regulation is to make sure that whatever you are spending money, you should be clear the relative weight of the currency, not where it's just overvalued and you just jump around and so on and so forth. So we've spent at least 50 years going off the rail. There's not going to be a quick fix. But at least in terms of a quick fix, what you want to do is, for instance, all the areas of waste, all the leakages, all the corrupt practices. Yes, I know that can also introduce a big, it's so heavy that it will, but that's no excuse. If you can wipe those out in one day or 1 week, by all means. But where it has to do with the productive process, there are no quick fixes. You just have to make sure that each succeeding policy, in terms of the price of capital, in price of labor, in terms of allocative efficiency to your health sector, to your manpower, to your schools, to your manpower development programs, the structure of your trade, you know, where you started introducing all kinds of funny things from what I just said. No, you can't do things like that because then you are introducing things that will create oscillation to the proportion that you can now handle in the short or in the immediate or short term. So your quick fixes comprises of efficiency-driven policies that will begin to ameliorate the system. Once you set that direction, don't worry about how it has now stopped anything. The tendency is one to create in the system, because anything you do other than that, and you violate the time frame, the built-in lags in production, consumption, exportation, importation and so on, then you run into problem. I don't know if I'm explaining it. So you have to look at all the policies. Let the policies be the right policies in the context. Don't let the time frame in which you feel you have done this, you've just done that, because invariably you'll be hitting the wrong thing and expecting what should be a medium-term result in the short term. And that cannot happen because there is that lag that is already built into the system.
If you're just joining us, our guest on today's edition of The Conversation is Dr. Kalu Idika Kalu. We'll be right back after the short break. Stay with us. Dispassionately. You're welcome back. Our guest is still Dr. Kalu Idika Kalu, foremost economist and politician. Let me ask you, sir, to break this down for us in a way that the ordinary Nigerian will understand. And I'd like to ask you, if you had the opportunity to sit with the president for 5-10 minutes, what would be your advice to him in terms of growing this economy, ensuring that Nigerians have food on their table?
Well, there are several things. I've addressed a lot of these issues in different contexts. At the time, we were getting kudos, as you say, for taking that instant decision on subsidy removal. The environment was ripe. Having taken that decision and announced it, I had it at the same time everybody else had it. You could say almost at the same time, because when I was told, maybe the news had not permitted. You see, at that time, you address the issue of supply. The issue of supply means what can you immediately deliver to the market? Okay, we are now talking about opening up reserves of all sorts. When I hear this, I'm very skeptical. I've been in government, but I was never in a position to judge the reliability of our reserves, knowing how we keep things, or the ease with which you can distribute. When I see a pickup truck throwing bags at people, that's not the way and then they are fighting over these things. So you have to have a better plan. There should be, how do you deliver available reserves to the market? You have to, what do you have? How do you increase enough supply? You do your back of envelope, if you like, calculations. What do you need to make an impact in terms of the necessities? How much do you have to supplement what you already have locally in reserves in the market, so that at least you can mitigate the increase that you might expect to happen from that instantaneous decision? You go through the whole range, the various ministries, they should be able to contact cooperatives and so on and so forth. You do that calculation, at least you mitigate. And the good way you have for taking that decision, you leverage on it. I've said that elsewhere also. Leveraging means out there, never mind the funny ideas we keep having about the fund and the bank and the ADB and all these international or even bilateral institutions. They want us to succeed. We should stop talking about how some people are there for us not to succeed. They want us to succeed. They pitied us for a long time. If we thought that if we succeed, we are just going to overtake them. That is wishful thinking. That is super ambitious. That they want us to succeed. So you leverage on that. Besides your fund availability, you leverage. I'm trying to give you stepwise solution now. Whether it's grants, you push. Whether it's low-cost funding, to mobilize supply, to mobilize resources, to mobilize supply, to reduce the impact of prices arising from decision you have taken. In any case, by the time you thought through this, that is what enables you to even face it, at least within quarters or biannual or something, 2-3 years of budget. And you are watching Like we are discovering now, which some people should have known, there's no way you can remove it totally. There's the landed import price will be landed import price. The value, the price at which it goes to the consumer will not change that much in the very short term. The question is how you are distributing that margin. Who's paying for that differential? It may not be the government, it may be the consumer, it may be the middleman, you know. But all this have to be explicitly taken into account in policy making. Those are the things that will have immediate impact on the policy. Now, we can't go into the issue of management. Who is managing what? Who is managing what policy? Which ministry? You know? So, anything that will improve the efficiency of management is also very, very important. All the things we have detested about ways and means and so on and so forth, you bring all those to bear. Every government uses this, but you have to control it. You have to be on top of it. It cannot come as an afterthought. You understand what I'm saying? So precisely you have these things to focus clearly to minimize this location that we are seeing in the first instance. So that is it. Of course, for the medium term, you look at your financing, you look at your savings. We are among one of the lowest saving nations in the world in terms of our savings to GDP. We have to develop instruments to encourage household saving, institutional savings. The price has to be right. If the price is to be right, the interest structure has to be right. So you have to look at the interest structure to give that positive incentive for people to save. From that saving, you develop instruments that you are going to sell to absorb those resources. All of this could also be in the short term, but people have to know exactly what they are doing.
Right. Your submissions is based on planning, pre-planning.
Yes.
Now.
No. Even after I don't know what to call it, after the trumpet has sounded, and then you see that, my goodness, these are coming up. Then you go into that, not into defensive action that may lead you to fairly, not being too crude about irrational, knee-jerk.
So my question really is how timely, although commendable, was a removal of subsidy?
I've already answered the question. I mean, I don't want to be the horse over and over. No. The subsidies should never have been sustained for so long.
Okay.
Exactly.
Of
course, we are not talking about administration now. Don't get me into that. I have been involved with them. My friend have been involved. We are not talking about administration. We are not putting about who takes more fault than the other. For the country as a whole, subsidies come and go. They come up, they are phased out, new ones come in, new subsidies are applied to those areas, but you cannot sustain subsidies for the length of time we've sustained it. You see what I'm saying? There are things that should come ideally within a budget session or two budgets. You put up incentives, which may be term subsidies, but by the next season or by the next 3 seasons, you want to replant a whole cocoa this thing. It may take you 5 years to do that. So you may have a subsidy that will last 5 years to encourage the replanting of cocoa or palm oil or whatever, soybeans, whatever. You understand? It's all geared to the time structure, the gestation, the time frame of what you are trying to produce. But if you sustain subsidies as you don't want, why shouldn't we want Nigerians to pay the price of petroleum products when we should be reaping from the price of petroleum products? But you don't sustain your refineries. We have a turnaround maintenance that seems to go nowhere. We are not allowing investment. We are not developing the area. The whole place is, you know what, I mean, the Niger Delta it's like, it's an eyesore. It's a shame. I headed the refinery study, and we had proposed how we should develop that whole area to really reflect that this was a region that was producing so much resources. The agriculture, the school system, the manufacturing system, the rail network, the railway network, name it. That's what you should have in the Niger Delta. But look at the whole blight Look at the whole blight, both the riverine, the brackish water, the whole vegetation, everything polluted. So when you have that, and then you want to ask questions, how do you fix something in an instant? Those are the things we should have been fixing all that time. So instant fix will only come where there's a price change and you alter the price or the exchange rate or the interest rate. But when you have whole structures that require 2-3 years of investment to sustain the whole environmental, it is ridiculous, if I may say so. It's absurd for us to imagine that there's some crank you now, because all those things come into play. Right. You understand? We are being absolutely frank here. You know, all those things will affect the efficiency of your total resource allocation. All those things should have been cleaned up, should be reinvesting. Cocoa farms, the new seeds, building institutions, building the primary schools, building the structures that last. If you look at some of those structures, look at all the educational structures all over the country. During this Boko Haram, not Boko, well, I suppose it's also Boko Haram, abduction of students and so on. When they showed those schools, where some jokers will just bring their truck and take out school children, no solid structures, no security structures. Those are the things we have to do ahead of time. We can't come in this instance and say, oh, what is the quick fix? The quick fix is all those things we should have been doing before. We should have been removing subsidies in small bits over the last 10 years, 15 years. Where we remove some, we see a new area where it is needed, like it's needed in America or Russia or anywhere. But you can't just have an oil sector and people are buying the product at 50% of the international price. We are losing there too, you know? So, but to fix it, it's not just to fund the difference, but to bridge that gap by solid structures that are sustainable.
Right. Right, so I'd still like you to look at this issue of subsidy for us. And right now, of course, with the removal of subsidy, at the federal allocation level, states are getting more money. Is it right for us to be sharing the gains of subsidy at this level, or saving, or putting it into something more meaningful for the benefit of the nation?
We've had a blind-sighted view of the whole matter. You see, you might call it what we term money illusion. The real value of money is not the volume of money. It's what the money can buy. That's the real value of the money. So we have to make a distinction between sharing more and having more purchasing power. Because with your inflation at 25, 29, 30%, well, the increase has to be more than that before you now begin to assess. I'm talking in general terms. For the subsectors, depending on whether you are concentrating on agricultural purchases or non-agricultural purchases, what is the real value of the extra money you have is a function of how much more you have beyond the mere money illusion of higher currency, higher cash you have. So we talked about all this when we were talking about debt relief and all the money saved. Now we're talking about removal of subsidy and all the money saved. Well, you have to be very careful how you gauge what additional money they are getting. In terms of what they are purchasing, what the states and subunits, what the general population are able to get because they are getting more money by charging more because of the inflation, unless it covers the cost of production, you may be worse off. In other words, those budgets, those federal allocation shares they are getting may be less than what they were getting 2 years before because of the value. New price regime they face. They are not able to employ as many teachers as we would have thought. They are not able to maintain the school equipment. They can't buy new equipment, you know, and the salaries they pay may not purchase the same thing as they did two budget years before. So we have to be very careful to now begin to talk about what we are going to save beyond what you can consume. to even maintain your purchasing power may be the immediate problem they must be facing, with increasing number to deal with in terms of people in the system, patients in hospitals, and what have you. So I hope money illusion has to be explicitly taken into account in assessing the net gain from the removal of subsidy. What is clear is that by removing subsidy and allowing the price to reflect the real market value, you can stop on toward inter-border flows, all these policing battalions to police your borders. All you have to do is make sure that the price differential is not worth anybody's while to carry these things and go to Niger or Cameroon or Benin Republic, and so on and so forth. You understand?
Right.
That's where the policy comes in. It's not the administrative blocking people from taking it abroad. The price differential should be such. The same thing with all the talk about BDCs and the black market and the rest of it. It's the price that is the issue. It's not the number of BDCs. It's not the trade by BDCs. It is be able to sustain a market allocative efficiency that keeps that differential to the minimum. For administrative time frame, lags, those are the things that confer any benefit. Yeah. Instead of waiting in the central bank, you can run quickly somewhere and buy a currency as you are boarding a plane. The differential should be so small. And of course, when you are doing that, no person in their good mind will go and be buying millions of foreign exchange on the roadside. Because this requires documentation, it requires planning, even aside of the security implications. Yeah. So the way you stop all those things is not by reducing BDCs to 2 or 3 or 5. It's by having policies that have that allocative efficiency that creates minimum administrative difference. Like we've had it for years, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. All of a sudden, we started having all kinds of windows, and we didn't have windows restructured in terms of dimensions. Right. By nominally allocating, somebody allocates, superior intelligence allocates people's tastes and desires as to how much they should pay for foreign exchange. Those things are what you can remove instantly. Right. You understand? Right. Aside the corruption and the rest of it. And of course, it's all these things that bred the corruption beyond what should normally be the case.